Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind, the show that's all about the picks. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I've got a fun pick for today. How about you?
Well, I have a really fun video game pick. I don't know. Do you want me to go first and talk about what I've been playing?
Sure, because I think this is a game that I've asked you about. I texted you and asked you what you thought of it. You've been holding out on me. You didn't answer my question. You're waiting for the show.
I was trying to be professional. I was trying to be
all right. You didn't want to spoil
creator.
it? You don't want to spoil it for me or the audience.
No, it's not for you. Like I just want to, just optimize my time, talk about it once, so that you get to hear about it, and also our listeners get to hear about it.
All right, I'm up for that. I get a full 10 minutes instead of a couple of sentences in iMessage.
All right, exactly. So the game I've been playing is Octopath Traveler II, and which I want to recommend to our Unwind listeners, but some context is necessary. First of all, I'm 10 hours into the game. This is a 50 to 60 plus hour video game. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, it's a good old chunky boy of a video game. It's the kind of game that you really need to sink your teeth into. It requires time and dedication. And I obviously take what I'm about to say with the context of someone who's maybe spent, who's maybe seen 1/5 or 1/6 of this game. So Octopath Traveler 2 is the sequel to the original Octopath Traveler that came out, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. And the first Octopath, which, by the way, terrible name, but it is what it is. The original game made by Square Enix, it pioneered a couple of things. First of all, it was the first video game to show off this new 2.5 HD graphical style that it looked incredible and totally new in it, when it debuted in the first game.
Right.
This unique combination of these 2D sort of retro-looking Super Nintendo-like characters against very detailed 3D and 2D backgrounds with this brand new sort of blooming effect over it. It felt and it looked very novel and cool at the time.
Yeah, it's very hard to explain what it looks like, except that it's a little bit like looking at an old NES game that's been pulled forward into the 2020s.
Kind of, yes.
Because it has that flair of the 3D that is there, but it's also very pixelated and chunky pixels like the older games.
Yeah, kind of like imagine a Super Nintendo game, but it's also a diorama of sorts.
Right,
right. You're looking at a mix of like a Super Nintendo game and one of those old like flip books what's the name of those books that like you open the book and there was like a 3D paper thing inside?
Remember that? A pop-up book.
A pop-up book, yes. I think that was the name. So it kind of feels like that. Anyway, that graphical style later was used by Square Enix in other video games. It was used, I want to say, in last year's Triangle Strategy. It was also used as the engine of the remake of the Super Nintendo RPG Live Alive that came out on the Switch a few months ago that I never checked out, but that I actually mean to get back to at some point.
I played the demo for a little bit on that.
You did?
I did a little bit. I played a little bit of the demo. It was pretty good, but I didn't. I was kind of the same way. I moved on to other things pretty quickly.
Okay. So anyway, I was very intrigued by Octopath Traveler years ago, and I started playing the original. But it had some serious issues in that I wasn't really taken by the story or by this unique approach of, it's called Octopath because you can follow 8 different characters in their journey. And, you can pick one starting character. You can pick whoever you like amongst these 8 characters. And eventually, through the course of the story, their paths sort of interject and, they get to continue on this journey together. What I didn't like about the original, though, which is, a common complaint amongst all the people who played the first game, is that it all felt very disjointed. It all felt very disconnected. And after a while, the only thing that was left, because I didn't particularly care about the story and the characters, I didn't find them very relatable at all, and actually they were very stereotypical of JRPGs, and not in a good way. All that was left was the graphical style and the music, excellent music, which is also, I'm glad to report, very much a feature of the second game as well. But you were basically just left to look at a pretty video game. And I mean, there are plenty of, good looking video games these days. And I think it's essential for a JRPG to combine all of those aspects, good graphics, great music, great battle mechanics, which the first game had. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But you also need to have great characters and a story, to justify, hey, I'm going to be spending 50 or 60 hours playing this video game. And I didn't care about the story, so I dropped off very quickly with the first game. Now, I was very skeptical about the second game, especially because Square Enix, when they started teasing this game last year, they didn't really say all, they didn't really talk about all the changes and quality of life improvements that were actually going into this game. They were just saying, and a brand new Octopath Traveler is coming, and we have 8 new characters. That's it. I was like, oh, well, really? I mean, that's it? It's just... I don't think they did a good enough job in terms of the marketing leading up to this game. But I gotta tell you, John, this is an amazing JRPG. At least given what I've seen so far. I am pretty optimistic about this statement, given what I've heard from people who have played much more of this video game than I have so far. I mean, Jason Schreier at the Triple Click podcast is absolutely raving about this game. But I've also heard really good things from Brandon and Steven on the Into the Aether podcast, which is another great video game show that I listen to every week. So, what Square Enix didn't tell us about Octopath Traveler 2 is that in addition to, yes, 8 new characters, this game actually takes a kind of open worldy approach that is
interesting.
In some ways very reminiscent of Elden Ring, in a way that you are obviously free to go wherever you want, with some limitations. I mean, like in Elden Ring, you are free to enter an area that is way above your level. The game tells you, as opposed to Elden Ring, where you just find out.
You just die.
You just die. The game tells you, like, there's a little sort of danger level text label that appears when you're about to enter an area that, if you just start the game and you see an area that says danger level 15, that's probably way too high for you. But you're free to go, you're free to go anywhere if you want to. And obviously you're free to pick whoever you want amongst this roster of 8 characters. But the similarities, I mean, they go way beyond that in terms of as you start progressing with the story, you pick a starting character, and depending on who you pick, you may have to complete 1 chapter, or you may have to complete 2 chapters before you can continue on the journey and continue on the world map and meet other characters. But the open world approach is also reflected in sort of Octopath Traveler 2's approach to side quests. It's very mysterious, and it's very sort of leaning toward making you discover how you can help NPCs in their side quests. And it's very Elden Ring in the way that the game doesn't sort of... It's not like a Ubisoft game in that it places a waypoint on your map and it tells you, hey, this side quest can be completed by going to this point. It doesn't tell you. It's up to you to figure it out. And it's like in Elden Ring, I find myself taking notes from time to time and be like, okay, this character in this town asked me about, I don't know, this candle. And I guess I'm making a note for myself because I got to find this candle somewhere else. So that approach to you can go anywhere, you can pick whoever you want, and side quests, it doesn't hold your hand necessarily, is something that I appreciate. The characters, at least the 3 of them that I've seen so far, are much, much better than the starting characters I experienced in the first game. I'm very glad that based on the little description alone, I chose to go with Oswald as my starting character. So this Oswald character is a wizard who's been wrongly accused of burning down his house with his wife and kid inside. and is being imprisoned. And so the first few chapters of Oswald's storyline are sort of this Count of Monte Cristo-like story in which Oswald wants to escape prison, and he finds an accomplice. And the first chapter is all about making the escape from this island where he's been held prisoner, which is very cool. And, it's basically this guy's plotting revenge against this former friend and colleague of his called Harvey. And so you eventually, spoilers, I guess, for the first chapter, you eventually make this escape and you get to, travel south and meet other characters. And the three characters that I've seen so far, the other two are called Temenos, a sort of an inquisitor for the church who wants to look into the murder of the sort of higher priest of another town, and Trone, she's a thief whose chapter I've only just begun, but it's all very intriguing based on sort of like who framed. Actually, who betrayed her group of thieves in this mission that they had. I don't know. These three characters are much better presented, and the stories are much more engaging than the first game. The music, as I mentioned, is fantastic. Like, there are some songs in Octopath Traveler 2 that honestly, like, they shouldn't go this hard, but they do, and I absolutely love them. The music of the first one was also good. I am super happy with the soundtrack of the second game. And also, I gotta tell you about the battling system, which has to be, and this is not an exaggeration, I think this is the most polished and most fun take on a battling system that I've seen come from Square Enix in a turn-based RPG in recent years. It feels like the culmination of some concepts that they explored in the 3DS days with Bravely Default, which I also liked, the first Octopath Traveler, and this feels like the most polished version of all of those experiments. It's a turn-based system based on this idea of you can charge your skills to make it more powerful with these boosts that you have, and each turn you gain a boost up to 4 boosts. So there's that strategic element of, do you want to wait and keep charging your boosts, or do you want to use them all, but then later you got to recharge? And there's also the concept of breaking an enemy. So if you break an enemy, if you find the weak point of an enemy, you can break it. And if you manage to break an enemy, later your moves are going to be more powerful. So there's a lot of sort of this push and pull mechanic in terms of, do I want to just go full out and attack, try and break the enemy and keep stocking up damage? Or do I want to maybe play a little bit more defensive and keep sort of accumulating my boosts so that later I can come out with a single big powerful move? And I'm simplifying here for the sake of the podcast, but it works really well, and it creates some really strategic moments in which you need to study the enemy and sort of understand the pattern of the enemy's moves, especially if there's more than one enemy you're fighting against. But it's super fun, and of course it becomes very flexible the moment you start considering, like, okay, my characters, one of them has a sword and the other is a magician, and this other dude is like a cleric who's more meant for healing other people in my party. So how can I combine all of these different mechanics with the party that I have? And then, of course, it looks fantastic. Like, the game looks incredible. Right. I've sent you some pictures, and you've seen how good it looks. So 10 hours into Octopath Traveler 2. Great fighting mechanic, excellent music. Love the graphics, and finally the story is more engaging than before, with a surprising open world kind of approach that I was not expecting from this game. I can tell you this game is holding my attention, which the first one did not do. It was like this pretty toy that got boring after a while, and this game does not.
Oh, that sounds great, Federico. Yeah, interesting. I'm very intrigued by this game. I never played the original, so...
and I should say, this second game is totally separate from the first one. It's like a completely different cast of characters, completely unrelated story. You don't need to play the first one. Just play the second one. Yeah.
Oh, definitely good. All right, cool. This episode of Mac Stories Unwind is brought to you by Collide. Collide has some really big news. If you're an Okta user, you can get your entire fleet to 100% compliance. How can you do that? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they've fixed the problem. It's really that simple. Collide patches one of the major holes in zero trust architecture: device compliance. Without Collide, IT struggles to solve basic problems like keeping everyone's OS and browser up to date. Unsecure devices are logging into your company's apps because nothing is there to stop them. Collide is the only device trust solution that enforces compliance as part of authentication, and it's built to work seamlessly with Okta. The moment Collide's agent detects a problem, it alerts the user and gives them instructions on how to fix it. If they don't fix it within a set amount of time, they're blocked. Collide's method means fewer support tickets, less frustration for users, and most importantly, 100% fleet compliance. Visit collide.com/MacStoriesUnwind to learn more and book a demo. That's KOLIDE.com/MacStoriesUnwind. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. So I'm going to recommend this week a documentary that has kind of an awkward title. It's called Bono and the Edge: A Sort of Homecoming with David Letterman. Okay, that's quite a mouthful. Yeah. But this is a Disney Plus documentary. So it's streaming on Disney Plus. And like from a meta standpoint, I look at Disney Plus and what they're doing with some of their documentaries, especially their music documentaries, and wondering, why is it that Apple TV Plus has not done this? Why is U2 on Disney Plus and Taylor Swift and a bunch of other artists who have had interesting documentaries on Disney Plus? I'm glad that they're on Disney Plus, but it seems like a natural fit with Apple Music, whereas Disney is just got their video streaming service. But in any event, I like this a lot. I mean, I guess if I could pick two bands that were the most formative of my taste early on when I was a teenager, it would be U2 and REM. And I'm still a big fan of these bands. I definitely fell off with U2, though, at some point in the more recent albums. But I still love their older music. And this is an interesting documentary because it's part travelogue, part music songwriting, creative process documentary, and part concert. It's got a little bit of everything in here because it's the narrator for the documentary is David Letterman, which apparently David Letterman is a good friend of both Bono and The Edge, and they invited him to come to Dublin, Ireland, and talk to them a little bit about their careers. And so the backstory here is that during COVID, they found themselves revisiting their older music, their catalog, going back to the earliest albums, and approaching them from a more, maybe in some respects, a more modern take, and also a more stripped down and, I guess, acoustic take to a lot of these songs. And there was an album that came out not long ago of these reimagined songs that you can find on all the streaming services. And it has, I think, like 40 songs on it. So it's a lot of their catalog that they revisited. And what David Letterman does is it's his first time in Ireland. It reminds me a little bit of the Eugene Levy's story documentary that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, because it's his first time in Ireland. So on the one hand, he's just kind of exploring Dublin. He's walking into the shops and the pubs and through the parks and meeting the people of Ireland and talking to them about U2 and about, Ireland as a country, and delving into the history of the country a little bit too. But then he's also sitting down with Bono and The Edge individually and together and talking to them about their careers, about their early days when they started as teenagers. Their first album, full-length album, came out when they were like 18. And Ireland was a very different place in the late 70s, early 80s. And they've seen a lot of change. They've seen a real Ireland has grown up a lot in that time, I guess, is the way I would put it. From a very a country that was driven largely by the Catholic Church to becoming a much more liberal society and kind of a tech hub, at least when it comes to places like Dublin and Cork. And they grew up in Dublin during these kind of tumultuous times and saw a lot of this change come. I mean, there you see, if you look at kind of their early album covers, you can see them standing in these very rough and tumble areas of the docks down by the water in Dublin. And if you go to those places today, which I have, you will find a bunch of shiny office buildings and cafes and shops. It's a very, it's really transformed over those years. And so, one of the parts that I think that struck me the most was when David Letterman's talking to The Edge, and he talks about how he has 6,000 song snippets recorded on his iPhone. And he's played a couple of them that he had come up with recently for David Letterman. And it took me back to when we interviewed Frank Turner, and he talked about his notebooks and how he had all these snippets and, scraps of songs that he'd been working on and off over the years. And I think that's very typical of a lot of musicians. So it was, to me, it was a really interesting view into the way he creates music and creates lyrics and comes up with the melodies. And then on top of that, there was a little bit of, they would break every so often to the special show that they did in Dublin that was very acoustic with an orchestra as their backup band, basically, because the other two members of the band were not part of this documentary. This was just Bono and The Edge. And The Edge was playing acoustic guitar and Bono was singing, and the rest of the instrumentation was done by an orchestra. And they were really well done versions of a lot of these early songs. So if you have any interest, I think, in Ireland and U2 and the history of bands like U2 and just the creative process of making music, this is a good documentary to watch. I will say that I think David Letterman is probably a little overbearing in spots here. I mean, this is a documentary that really, at the heart of it, is about Bono and The Edge in the context of Dublin and, the surroundings that they grew up in and that influenced their music. And there's a little bit, maybe too much of the kind of like David Letterman show shtick where he walks into a pub and acts like the dumb American, and talks to people, which is funny at times, but also maybe a little overdone for the kind of show that this is meant to be. But I still really enjoyed it. Just kind of, I had heard it was coming out. It only just came out like 4 days ago, and Jennifer and I watched it over the weekend, and it was fantastic. So I highly recommend it.
Very nice. Okay.
All right, Federico. Well, that's it for this week. You can find the two of us over at macstories.net. We're on Mastodon too. You can find our profile pages at vitici.macstories.net and johnvoorhees.macstories.net, where you can see what we've been posting and follow us if you'd like. We're also on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.